Here, Eric, we are the research institute. I'm so pleased to hear that theories and analysis can be so useful in the real world. And you have been really have your 2 feet in these 2 worlds at the same. I'm always unionist and labor educator. On the other hand, anthropologist. And obviously, you are taking anthropological research very seriously. You are doing a PhD. Let me put it this way, why do you bother doing a PhD? What's the value? Obviously, your passion and your real impact to this world is through the experimenting, you are doing the practical work. So why do you bother doing a PhD at all, and especially in the anthropology? What is the value for you?
Well, I think when I'm teaching, I often start the semester when I explain my kind of teaching philosophy with students, I put a quote on the board, which is, that the philosophers who have interpreted the world, the point, however, is to change it, which I think is from someone who lived not very far from Halle, as a matter of fact, a famous Central European. But why do I mean, I gravitated to doing a PhD because I was looking for a place to reflect on and interpret the experiences I'd had prior to that. I started my PhD a little bit later than many people do. I think I was 32 or maybe 33, I can't remember. And I'd already had a lot of different experiences in mostly labor organizing. I'd also lived in China for some time and was connected with the labor movement there, which is a fascinating world. And yeah, I mean, I think that I believe in this dialectic between acting and reflection, or sort of this loop that people talk about in the participatory action research framework, which is you observe, you orient, you decide, you act, then you observe again and reflect on the results, and then you act again, and you plan and you act again. I think that that's a very powerful way of, I think you need both. You both need to have a type of hands-on engagement, or at least I feel like I need personally. It's interesting too, because I think in the hard sciences, the social sciences, I don't think that there's I don't think the social sciences have figured out sort of a framework for engaging with reality in ways that I think the hard sciences really have. And so it's very common in universities that people are commercializing scientific research constantly. And no one really asks questions about that, except when things go really badly. And I think, the University of Frankfurt, there's the social science research building, used to be the Erik Forman building, and I mean, I think that, and that maybe is a particularly sort of startling example of why the social sciences need to be engaged. I think personally, I found I've learned so much about this industry from being deeply embedded in it, from being behind the wheel of a car as a driver, from being a labor educator who stands in a classroom full of drivers every day. But the lens that I've had to interpret that through has come from social theory, anthropology, and other disciplines, which is very valuable. And I think it's also changed how I've understood anthropology. So I don't know if that's a really complete, that's a kind of all over the place answer, but
no, it's I think it's very interesting. You make the comparison to hard science. Number one, as a relation between hard science and the practice it's true. It's much closer. I mean, at least the loop is clearer for us to see. Social science is supposed to be about practice and the reality, but sometimes all the words just evaporate in the air. Is not understandable to many real actors in the world. But as you mentioned, I'm just now thinking, why is the commercialization the key mechanisms to translate the discoveries in hard science to practice, right? Why there's no other means? I mean, I suppose the minor exception probably will be medical science. Sometimes it means through like a vaccine and etc. But it's through lots of effort in order to make it to be used in a way that is not completely commercialized. Otherwise, in the normal circumstances, it seems that commercialization is really the royal path for
Yes.
science to go into the real world. I mean, that is quite I think, a fascinating question. But the problem, my final question is that why anthropology? I mean, what is anything particularly charming for you in this discipline? Or you think actually there's potential utility there, but we haven't really explored to its full? Or do you have any suggestions, advice for fellow anthropologists?
Well, I feel like I'm the one looking for advice from fellow anthropologists. But I guess I could say personally why I've been drawn to anthropology. I mean, I think that personally I've always been drawn to anthropology since I was an undergraduate. And like many people of my generation, I think the first anthropologist I encountered was David Graeber, and who, he had a particular way of using anthropology to get people to think differently about human potential and human society, of looking at, using kind of anthropology in ways it was not intended. And sort of the reverse way it was intended, in fact, if we think about like 19th century anthropology, of looking at, well, here are these people who've lived very differently than people in the West. And, I think, and we could learn from that, and it can open our minds to different ways of life. I think what's drawn me to anthropology is I think it's really the only discipline that is asking the biggest and most important questions of all, which is how do people live? Um, could we live different, and could we live differently? That to me is that is the question of humanity. And so I'm just very drawn to exploring that. And I think just in terms of the theory and how it connects to practice, I think that so the social sciences, what academic reflection can offer you is a pathway to much greater creativity. Because if you can look at things from one level of abstraction, you see new ways to use existing elements. So for example, if you look at if you're in the labor world, you look at unions and you say, well, this union is conservative and this union is reformist. Our goal is to do, to achieve this policy objective or to achieve this social change, or maybe let's just thinking about the left. You think, okay, our objective is to achieve socialism. Well, what is socialism? Socialism is, in theory at least, a much greater worker control over how things are produced and how they're distributed. So if that's your goal, and you're finding that the unions we have are not getting us there, can we take a step back and examine the question from one level of abstraction? If what you're looking for is socialism, and socialism is greater agency and control for workers, and incorporating not only a sort of dollar and cents definition of value in decision making, and if a union you think is a powerful tool to get there because it's a group of workers, are there other ways, first of all, to bring together a group of workers, and are there other ways that workers could have control over, means of production or over the economy? And once you kind of observe from that level of abstraction, you start to say, well, wait a minute, there's other things, if we abstract them from one level, they fulfill the same purpose. And so you start to see new pathways. So maybe the route to greater worker agency in this sector is not through a traditional union, because there's enormous barriers to achieving that. People have definitely been trying, and that personally, I think people should try lots of different things. I don't think there is any one correct path. I think we'll find out in practice. But maybe another way is that, who does aggregate workers together really well? Platform companies. And so maybe what we do is we form a company instead of forming a union. And maybe instead of getting the government to regulate, I do personally, I think that government regulation is definitely a dependence, some interesting dependencies between the success of co-ops and government regulation. And you need, my observation is that government regulation is definitely needed in this sector. I don't see co-ops as replacing that. But yeah, I think what I'm trying to express is that academic perspective, social science perspectives allow you to view things from one level of abstraction, which then reveals more creative pathways to get from point A to point B. At least that's my hope.
Thank you so much, Erik. That is really a beautiful commentary on anthropology and the theory. I just want to reiterate what you said, repeat what you said. Yeah, anthropology is charming because it's really enable us to imagine how people could live differently in a very practical manner, right? It's not a philosophical, metaphysical imagination, but to observe how can people reorganize themselves practically. And at the same time, theory is so important precisely because the theories can give us a practical method how to go from A to B via a route that we cannot observe directly in the world yet. But it may, you can chart a new path, right, in the real world. But that, in order to do that, we need a theory. So in this sense, theory is very practical, and actually, any innovative practices would need a theory. Yeah. So thank you very much, Erik. Yeah, that is a really great conversation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xiang.